Okay, recording in progress. I will wait for Facebook momentarily and then we can begin. There it is. All right. Okay, make sure my volume is up. It is. Hello, everyone. Welcome to History Matters, and so does coffee, our 200th episode. Boo! It is our 200th episode, and we're going to be talking a little bit about what that means. I love the fact that I'm speaking and I'm like little applause and little party hats. It's coming
Lots
up.
of emojis.
We are celebrating here today, folks. But before we talk about what 200 episodes has shown us, my oh my, just think back over those 200 episodes. I'm going to turn to my partner in crime, Annie, who is going to explain the rules of the game.
Good morning, everybody. Happy 200th anniversary to all of us here in the History Matters and So Does Coffee community. I'm Annie Evans from New American History, and I bring you greetings from Virginia. I am so excited that we have done this for 200 weeks. Many of us have been here the whole time. And many of you have found us along the way, which is so exciting. And so today, Joanne's prepared a special edition of History Matters for us. And so as you're listening, feel free to engage in the chat. Many of you are already doing so. I will come back in about 30 minutes and I will be looking for your fabulous questions related to today's topic. Those need to go in the Q&A down below, and we'll see you then.
And I will add to that that if you are new, if you are here for the first time, since we've been happily trumpeting out on so many social media platforms that this is the 200th episode, please tell people that you are here for the first time, because the History Matters community that's built up over those 200 episodes is amazing in more ways than I can say or count. And they will give you a robust welcome if you just say that you're here for the first time. Okay, so we started History Matters in April of 2020, just kind of cosmic. And the initial idea, or my initial idea, was, the pandemic was beginning. And I saw all these other people doing things to give to people who were stuck at home for the pandemic. So Lin-Manuel Miranda was putting up like rough drafts of music he wrote for Hamilton, and Patrick Stewart was, I think, reading a sonnet a day, and Yo-Yo Ma was playing a piece of music every day. And I thought, well, what can I do to contribute? And I thought, well, what can I do? History. History. I can do history. I can talk about history, but I can talk about history and why it's important. And I could definitely do that every day. Of course, we all thought the pandemic was going to last like 2 weeks, maybe three. But I thought, however, I can do this for a little while. I can do this, I don't know, for a couple of weeks. And that was the thought behind what became History Matters. It was just me thinking, well, this is what I can give. And we're all stuck at home and this is a weird time and we don't know what's happening. And I could talk about history and I could talk about politics, and that will be my contribution. And, 200 weeks was like not even a glimmer. It was like, well, a month, 2 months, maybe three, I don't know. And then, of course, the pandemic will be over and we'll all feel better about everything. And of course, that didn't happen. So to say that a lot has happened since April of 2020 is beyond a dramatic understatement. I don't even have the words to describe. And I'm sure most of us here watching, just it's a big time condensed during the pandemic. So actually, it is a big blob of time. Suddenly, months, years, weeks, they all condensed into one time blob. So a lot in so many ways has happened. I want to offer you, I actually went online just to cast my mind back to April of 2020 and to see what some of the headlines floating around were at that moment. And CNN, conveniently enough, just lists. They have a site, and I could not recreate for you where I found it, but people will, because the people who have been coming here regularly to History Matters, Tim, are really, really good at finding things online. At any rate, CNN, I went all the way back to April 9th. They do it day by day headlines that I suppose were CNN headlines. So these are all right around April 9th, 2020, that CNN posted as headlines. No comment is going to be necessary. Um, Revised coronavirus model predicts fewer deaths, but tens of thousands in US still expected to die. Hmm. Airlines and TSA report 96% drop in air travel as pandemic continues. Publishers of okay, I got to get this right. Hydroxychloroquine, I probably got that wrong, study touted by Trump says the research didn't meet its standards. Huh. Healthcare workers are wearing smiling photos of themselves to put coronavirus patients at ease. I'd forgotten about that. Family members get into a fight when one accuses the other of hiding toilet paper. Oh, the memories. Seth Meyers on what it's like to do late night from his attic. Everything you need to know to properly postpone a wedding. It's such a moment in time. How coronavirus may finally end the handshake in politics. Okay, these are all like April 9th, April 10th, 2020. That just do this little trip down memory lane for yourself because it's quite something to see. Now, that could have been a moment, and probably some of us thought it might become a moment of coming together because it was a crisis and it was a weird crisis, and we hadn't experienced something quite like it in and of itself as a pandemic. And then add to that the president at the time who had his own way of dealing with that moment, which was not ideal and certainly wasn't aimed at bringing us together. We could have come together in that moment of crisis. We most definitely did not. And part of that was, I think, because we had a president who, even at that moment, was deliberately favoring people who liked him and disfavoring people who did not like him. And partly because, and we've talked about this a lot on History Matters over the years, we are not in a we era, right? And the pandemic, to me, was proof of that in a big way. That even at a moment when people were dying, when we were in a crisis, a huge, undeniable crisis, we couldn't come together enough for people to all agree to wear masks, for example. So that was a moment that really showed a lot about the current state of affairs and the mood, I suppose, of the nation, not in a good way. But that question, are we a we or not? Is there a we that came together at that moment? That obviously wasn't just a health problem. That was a democracy problem. And that is what we've been addressing in one way or another for 200 episodes. Democracy and our democracy problem. And what I want to do for the next few minutes is talk about some of the themes that we've addressed in those 200 episodes, because obviously that will be a way of partly reviewing what we've seen and what we've experienced during those 200 weeks. And also, it will be a reminder of what we've come together to talk about as a community over that time. So, a couple themes. And one that's worth mentioning, although it won't be at the center of what I'm talking about today, but so I actually went back to the same place where folks, well, for most folks, not Facebook folks, but if you've beamed in through the NCHE website, if you go to ncheteach.org/conversations, you will see, I think it's 17 pages of episodes that we've done, those 200 episodes. I went back and looked at some of the titles to remind myself some of what we've talked about. So some of what I'm talking about here comes from that. We did, on a good number of occasions, talk about, in essence, how do we get through this moment, right? Which I suppose it is partly about democracy, but it's bigger than that. That's almost a sort of community writ large kind of topic, with titles such as, on living through history, on how to not be despairing, for example. So a couple of times we've come together and just talked about what the heck is this, and how can we pace ourselves? How can we get through this? But on a broader theme, on a more democracy-minded theme, here are a couple ideas that came up again and again and again over those 200 episodes. Number one, and none of these are going to be surprising if you've been here for very long, because they come up again and again for good reason. Number one, emotion. Emotion as politics, right? The deliberate milking of emotion for political impact. We've talked about that a lot partly that's because as a historian, that's something I'm particularly interested in, is the fact that emotion and the deliberate deployment of emotion is politics. It's not an also ran, it's at the center of politics, but also because it really has been at the center for the time that we've been here as a community, at the center of politics. I've talked before, and it's not my term, rage harvesting, right? That there's been a lot of rage harvesting going on where someone says something deliberately to get people angry, and then harvests the rage. And a lot of what we've talked about, particularly speaking of the right, has been the centrality of emotion to what they are representing at the moment, that they're about anger and outrage and hate and you name the terms, but at the moment, and it's part of why the Republicans in the House haven't really done very much, because a lot of what's at the center of what they're doing is just emotion, anger, retribution, you name it. So there hasn't been a lot of policy and there haven't been a lot of really broader ideas being discussed. It's about emotion. What we've said again and again and again here on History Matters is don't just give in to that emotion, because a lot of the emotion that we see, people are deliberately trying to get it from us, right? They're deliberately trying to make us angry or outraged. They want people to say things they're going to be sorry they said. They want to drum up widespread public outrage of one kind or another. They want to, in one way or another, again and again and again, constantly surrounding us. There are people trying to get us emotionally, for the most part, angry, rage harvesting. So we've said over and over and over again here on History Matters, before you give in to the outrage, pause to consider that someone really wants you to be outraged, right? Someone probably is putting this here for a reason, and they are putting it here to get a response from you. And before you give in to that, consider the dynamics of what you're going through. Is someone trying to do this? Do they want you angry? And if so, why? So give yourself that moment to breathe and consider before you respond. And I think, particularly at this moment when emotion is a political tool to an extreme degree, that's really important. That's why we've talked about it. And here are some of the titles of episodes that have addressed this in one way or another. Cruelty is politics, the politics of threats and fear, the trap of nostalgia, that, get people thinking fondly of a non-existent past and you can yoke them right in. Othering is politics. And here are two that I'm just particularly fond of. There was one that title that was Manly Men in Power, but underneath, maybe a couple weeks later, the title became Macho Rodeo Politics, and that just makes me happy. So I had to say it during the 200th episode. Macho Rodeo Politics. Okay, so emotion and the power of emotion. That's one theme. Another theme, the power of words. We've talked about that a lot too. Words shape our understandings of things, which is on the one hand, very obvious thing to say, and on the other hand, a really powerful thing to say, because the way the words we attach to things, knowingly or not, shape how they are formed in our head and how we thus see the world. Words shape realities. And we've seen that in any different number of ways very early on. We saw that in what people were deciding to call what happened on January 6th, and we're still seeing that. That never stopped in a way, right? What was January 6th? Was it a riot? Was it an insurrection? Was it a failed coup? Was it an average day of tourism? Okay, at least we've kind of maybe dispensed with that one. But at any rate, what we call what happened that day clearly shapes how we understand it. And that's why some people are refusing to say, for example, that it was an insurrection. Oh, no, no, not an insurrection. Riot, which suggests kind of aimlessness, right? No, insurrection is purpose driven. Failed coup is really purpose driven. How we describe even just that day really has a political impact on the way we're understanding the moment we're in, which is why, after all of this time, people are still debating, or not debating, actually asserting the word they want to use to frame that day so that we think of it in a certain way. Words matter profoundly. And when they're being beamed down by people with political power, they matter even more. Uh, some of the titles of episodes that address this, Framing Matters, another episode, When Words Mean Everything and Nothing. So again, a theme, an idea that's come across during History Matters, this very idea. Think about the words being used, the words others are using, the words you're choosing to use, and think about what they mean and how they're shaping our reality because they do. Okay, another theme, the power of information, right? The essence of democracy, in a way, is the information that we are sharing in one way or another. Information from those with power to us, information that we have access to that shapes our reality. The power of information, how we get it, where we get it, how accurate it is, how we are dealing with it. Major, major topic. We've addressed that in a number of ways too over these 200 episodes. And information, the essence of democracy, we've talked about misinformation, which in part was obviously a big issue during the pandemic. We've talked about misinformation and disinformation in the realm of politics, in the working of democracy. And now, of course, it's back at the forefront because of AI. And again, they're coming away from me now, the sirens. I don't know if you can hear them, but someone's angry at something I'm saying, and I don't care. At any rate, information, misinformation, disinformation, politics, democracy, the pandemic, it's major. And the fact that we are having a hard time sometimes discerning what's real and what isn't, it's a big problem, sort of almost a surreal problem. And it's something we have to think about. Okay, another topic we've come back to again and again and again, the power and importance of teaching, and particularly teaching history. Not surprising, given the wonderful hosting institution here, the National Council for History Education, that when you're trying to control the teaching of history, again, you're trying to control how people understand the past, what they recognize in the past, and thus how they understand the present and how they might envision the future. You're shaping our understanding of possibilities and opportunity if you're cutting out major portions of the past that you don't want us to see. If you're not allowed, for example, to really delve into the idea of racism when you study history or anything more broadly, that's probably going to shape how you understand racism now. And that is going to have a huge impact on wherever we go from this point. So we've talked a lot about the teaching of history. We've talked about culture wars. We've talked about banning books. And we've talked about culture wars and banning books and all of this as a form of propaganda. We've talked about propaganda as well. And here are some of the titles that reflected that. Bad history, quote unquote, and the harm it can do. Schools as cultural battlegrounds. Broadening the American story. That's a good one, right? Who we include and who we don't include. And that's been an issue too that is wrapped up in what we're allowed to teach or what books students are allowed to have access to. So teaching history. Another theme, and this one I almost don't have to say, I don't know if folks are playing bingo here this morning, but for those who haven't come here before, people we often play a game of bingo based on what I'm going to say during each episode. And there are things I always say in each episode. And contingency is one of them, to the point that I just laugh now when I say contingency, because I know if we're playing bingo, someone just got bingo. I talk about it all the time. As a matter of fact, and we're probably going to talk about this, or at least think about it briefly, tomorrow during the cocktail party to celebrate the 200th episode. I went back and found my first test case episode when I was trying to figure out if this whole idea would work. Guess what? It's about contingency. So right from the very beginning. But we've talked about contingency a lot over those 200 episodes because it matters profoundly now, because we have to realize we're in a moment of extreme contingency. Contingency always matters in history. We really, when you're looking at history, people don't typically know what comes next. And to understand the unfolding of history, you need to try and look forward through the eyes of your historical subjects and not just backward through the eyes of the present. So contingency is always important when thinking about history. But for this current moment, it's very important. Because to assume we've always been okay before, so we're going to be okay now, meaning very really we don't have to think about contingency because we know what's going to happen, it's going to be fine. That's not a good thought. That's really not helpful. We don't know what's going to happen, and maybe everything will be fine, and maybe it won't. And the second part of that equation is really, really important, and it's some of what we've addressed again and again here on History Matters, is the importance of recognizing it can happen here. Not that it necessarily will do us in permanently, but it might. And because of that possibility, we need to be good citizens. We need to speak up. We need to act. We need to be aware. We need to watch what's happening. We need to come together in communities to address what's happening, to decode what's happening, and to figure out what to do next. So, contingency and the awareness of the fact that we are in a moment of extreme contingency, that's really important. That's why I mention it almost every episode. And that brings us to another theme. If you're talking about the fact that it can happen here, democracy. Because through it all, and whatever we've been talking about for 200 episodes, in one way or another, we've been talking about democracy. We've been talking about what it is. We've been talking about how it works. We've been talking about its vulnerabilities or its fragility. We've been talking about the centrality of citizens in supporting democracy. In one way or another, we've been highlighting, discussing, analyzing, dissecting democracy because it's under attack, because it's endangered, because so many of us didn't think about it for so long, because in some ways we didn't feel that we needed to. And now we do. And we're living in a moment. And again, that's part of the reason for this History Matters program and the 200 episodes. We're in a moment where we really, really need to think about what democracy is, how it works, what needs to be protected to preserve it, what we can do to do that, and what can be attacked and weakened to work against democracy. Even just the simple fact that there are people assertively trying to undermine democracy on an ongoing basis, we have to see that. We have to address it. And that's some of what we've been talking about here on History Matters, the working of democracy and then the need to protect it. And here are some titles of episodes in which we've talked about that. And not surprisingly, the idea of accountability, I'd say that probably second after contingency is accountability. At one episode, I think is titled An Ode to Accountability, because the idea that people who we, the people, give political power to are accountable to us for how they use it, that's pretty central. They are. They may not think they are. They may not want to be. They may not act like they are, but in a democratic form of government, they are. And I think it's easy to forget that. And we live in an age, I've said this a lot of times, an age in which we have a real accountability problem where people don't want to be accountable for what they've done, for what they've said, for crimes they've committed. Huh. There are a lot of ways in which people assume, or not all people, but some people clearly assume they're not accountable. They don't have to be accountable. Who's going to make them accountable? That's a huge issue. That's a core principle of democracy. And we've talked about that a lot. We've talked about the rule of law, the idea that we are equal, we're supposed to be at least equal under the law, and that without the rule of law, pretty hard to have democracy. We've talked about voting rights, about suppression of voting rights, the importance of voting rights. We've talked about demagogues and tyrants and the danger, what a demagogue is, why that's been a central fear since the founding era, what it says about democracy and what that should say to us. We've talked about public opinion, why it matters. We've said this again and again and again, right? This is another idea that I've really drummed home. What we think and what we do matters. It does. And we may feel at times as though it doesn't. It's, well, what am I? I'm one person. Even me sitting here blathering at you for 200 episodes, sometimes I think, like, does this really matter? Like, I mean, what's the impact of this? Of course, that has not stopped me from blathering. But it's easy to think, like, really? Does it matter? Does it really matter? And the answer is yes, it does. It really does. And in the end, all of the hiding and lying and propaganda, all of that is testimony to the fact that what we think matters, because it does. And there have been moments in the last 200 weeks when people have spoken up and been outraged about something, and it's had an impact. So that's really important to remember. What we do and what we think, particularly what we do, matters. And that can be a real powerful force for good. So we've talked about that a lot too. And here are some of the episodes in which, in one way or another, we've really talked about democracy. There was an episode titled Demagogues and Tyrants. There was an episode titled Speakership Battles, the Hows, Whys, and WTFs. I have to sneeze here, as my mother would say, sneezing on the truth. There was an episode called Who Hates Democracy? Apparently, some people really do. An ode to accountability, why hearings matter, and they do, spreading information, power of public opinion, the rule of law, and democracy. So, in all of these ways, we've been talking about democracy in these 200 episodes. We also, in addition to talking and addressing important themes in history, democracy, politics, we've been coming together as a community for 200 episodes, folks. And we really have been coming together as a community. And first, I want to talk about why community is important. Then I want to talk for a moment about this community. Why is community important? In part, because it enables you to understand that you're not the only one thinking what you're thinking. And there's strength and power in understanding that what you're feeling or thinking is actually being thought and felt by other people. And thus, it matters more than you might think it does if you're thinking about it in isolation. Coming together equips us to work together for what is right, to be good citizens, to stand up for democracy, to spot attacks on democracy, right? Coming together as a community is part of the real working core of democracy. And when you look over the long haul of American history and you see moments when there's been real social change or real political change, very, very often, that's not a top-down endeavor, that's bottom-up. That's people organizing, coming together, protesting, speaking out, being a community of resistance, of opinion, of democracy. Community and democracy go together. Now, as far as this community is concerned, those of you who have been here for these 200 episodes, and if you haven't been, if you're here for the first time, I hope this episode will inspire you to come back. If you've been here now and again, I hope this episode will inspire you to keep coming back more. Those of you who have been here consistently, and I have to say, I have over the 200 episodes, I brag about this community to others because I'll say, no, you don't understand. This is a community and it matters. And here's my proof, because for 200 episodes or 100 or 150, people have been coming here, listening to me talk for 30 minutes, asking questions, doing a Q&A period for 30 minutes, and then sticking around for another 30 minutes when we just sort of engage in what we call the after party and talking amongst ourselves. So for 200 weeks, for 90 minutes, this community comes together. And whenever I say that, 90 minutes, like pretty consistently, this community comes and talks. People get impressed, right? That's some commitment to community. And we are a community. We are a community, as many people can attest, in the real world as well as here. People have meetups. There's all kinds of Slack channels. I'm so low tech. And there are so many different ways in which here within the confines of History Matters and on a broader scale, this community has become a community of sentiment, a community of commitment, a community of democracy, as well as a community of humanity. And I am prouder that I can say that I have been part of us coming together here and forming that community. It is a profoundly good thing that we have done here, folks, as well as being a model, an absolute model for how people on a ground level can come together and do things together. Look at what we've done. And it was enabled by the pandemic and the fact that suddenly we could be on Zoom. But here's a way in which Zoom and the pandemic had a positive outcome. We are a real community forged with Zoom, and a real community that has lasted. That's a remarkable achievement. And we need to recognize the fact that we did this together. We did this together over the last 200 episodes. And what we've done in coming together, talking about politics, asking questions, analyzing what we see, that's the essence of democracy. That's the core work of democracy. That's why I say every Friday morning, thank you for coming together to do the work of democracy together. That's what we've been doing here, coming together to work for the greater good of us all. And I will add here, of us all. And by that I mean diversity, inclusion. You know, people who say that they do not like DEI are saying they do not like diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's quite a statement. And that's not something that we say here. We believe in diversity and we want inclusion and we want to work for equity. Democracy, those are all the stuff. That's the core of democracy, all of those things. So I'm going to pause in a moment so that we can have Q&A. I just want to say here, I salute the work that we've done here together. I anticipate and look forward to the work we're going to keep doing because we're just going to keep going. Of course we are. So I just want to sort of pledge to be here with you as we sally forth, particularly over this year, and do the work of democracy together. At the end of this episode, I'm going to give my formal thank you for coming, but I'm going to say it now anyway, just because this is the moment to say it. Thank you for joining us here on a Friday morning to do the work of democracy. I am eternally grateful that we've been doing this and eternally grateful to you. And as I say every week, it matters. Okay. Mug, mug, mug. Okay. So those of you who are here and have not been here before, and I have a special mug presentation here. So for 200 weeks, and I do not have 200 mugs. For 200 weeks, I have had a mug that relates to the theme of what we're talking about. So this one, I'll show one side first and then the other. One side of this says, thank you for engaging in democracy every Friday morning. The other side is the 100th episode celebration.
I have the same one today. And we did not plan that. That
We've
is so
never
funny.
matched mugs, Annie.
We've never matched mugs.
We've never matched mugs. Okay, and this
Wow.
this is a Carolee mug, right?
The Carolee mug for
Must
sure.
be. And it has a bingo for those of you who are new here. It has a typical bingo card, which of course has contingency on it somewhere.
Yeah.
Assuming it does, uh, as well as beak boop. It has beak boop. So some of you may not know of Newbie, the history bird who was here until October. So he was here for most of it. So I've done an unusual thing. It's a 2 mug week. And the other mug is History Matters, and so does Newbie.
Yay.
He has to be here too.
He does.
So he it's a double mug day.
Wow. Well, this is a good time for a double mug day for sure.
I thought, and you know, he would have been peeping away, probably showing me his bird butt if he were here now. So I just figured he needed to be here. Okay, now I can stop talking so that we can have a Q&A. Yes, he would have been oodling. Well, let me open chat.
Would have oodled for sure.
For sure, oodling.
Wow. The chat is on fire. I can barely keep up. We have tons of questions. There's no way we'll get to all these, but we're going to do our darndest. Okay. Our friend Francesca, who comes to us from across the pond, I can't even do the time zone difference in my head, but I know she's one of our most loyal members of this community. She asks, how many of us here today were here for the first episode?
Oh, I wonder.
I know. I don't know if Claire can.
Can we do? I know.
Real quick. Maybe we can set tomorrow night when we do our big celebration. Maybe Claire, could we have a poll to see like when people who was there for the first one, who was there for 100?
Yes, Claire, so you have time to prepare it. But
yeah, I like that data. That would be a fun. Okay, thanks, Francesca. Great idea. Okay, Carolee, one of our teacher friends who's been here, I think, definitely since the very beginning. She always adds Bruce Springsteen to her questions because there's a
Wait a
running.
minute, wait a minute.
I'm a
Carolee says,
fan, just a little
Carolee,
bit.
Carolee says confession time. I only started at the second episode.
What? I was at the first one. How did that happen? She wants to know, have we ever been in a we era, and how can we get to a we era?
Well, we have had we moments, yes. I mean, think about sort of immediately after 9/11, right? That was a sort of we moment, and um, there was a sense of crisis and people came together. And that's kind of one of the points I was making in my comments, right? Typically, during a crisis, people come together and they're able to see beyond the sort of immediate obstacles in their way. And that's what I thought would happen when the pandemic started, and it didn't. As to how we get there, that's a tricky that I don't know if I have the answer to, but we have had those moments before. Wartime typically is a moment when that happens as well. We are not having a we kind of a moment now, and I've been talking about we here on History Matters and in the writing I've done, the public writing I've done, and in the speaking I've done, that we are not in a we moment and we need to be. But how we get there is a really good question. The first step, oddly enough and logically enough, is realizing that we're not in one and that we should be in one, right? Part of the ongoing problem of how we're experiencing this moment is it's very easy not to be aware of the things we're experiencing because either we haven't experienced them before or we're sort of going on autopilot. Autopilot enables us to think, oh yeah, democracy will be fine because it's always been fine. I don't think that's a safe bet. I don't think it's going to go away, but it sure isn't guaranteed. There are many ways in which we're used to thinking a certain way, and we're used to taking certain things for granted, and we're used to assuming that the United States is always an exception to all things. And I think we can say at this point that's not necessarily true, but it's hard to wrap your mind around that. That's some of the work we've been doing here on History Matters. I do want to pause for a moment only to say that it looks like my first partner in crime, Matt Messias, is here.
And
And
your second partner in crime is too. I think I saw Grace.
Grace is here too. Yes. So during the after party, you guys have to stick around, and during the after party, we can find a way to get your faces so that you can join in, because this wouldn't be here without Matt and Grace.
Absolutely. All
Oh,
right.
actually, can we put them on the? Should we put them on the screen now,
Oh,
or should
if they want to, that'd be great.
we put them on the screen?
Is Matt having a good hair day?
Or should we wait
I
till the
think
after party, Jessica?
yeah, let's wait till the after party.
Okay.
Matt and Grace, if you're okay with that, we will sneak
We
you
can we can
in.
check in with them.
Yes.
Okay,
Okay.
excellent.
We at least have to get a family photo and make John come on camera at the same time too.
That's true. That's true.
All right. Our other longtime member of this community, Julia Brennan, asks, oh, no, not Julia, excuse me, Debbie, also a longtime member. It seems like an earlier manifestation of the we are not we era was the period after 9/11. Rather than rallying the public to unite, the president told us to go shopping. Do you have thoughts on that? She asks.
Oh, commerce and capitalism. I guess at the time I didn't see that as an alarm signal, but we weren't tuned into alarm signals on that level, in the way that we are now, or certainly in the way that I am now. That whatever comes down the pike, there's some part of my brain that says, okay, what's coming down the pike? What does it mean? What are the implications? And sometimes it's fine and there are no deep implications, but sometimes there are some. Telling us to go shopping, I remember that because it was sort of like question mark, like really, that's the moral of this story. But it didn't feel as divisive a moment as, for example, the beginning of the pandemic when former President Trump was praising the people who like him and wanting to dispense aid to people who supported him but not others. And that so you can say on the one hand, having a we moment, are we having a we moment as one end of the spectrum? The other end of the spectrum is an assertively, deliberately divisive moment, and there's a lot of ground in between. I suppose part of what I'd say in answer to that.
All right. So many people flying by in the chat.
I know it's going very fast.
Really fast today. Okay, our good friend Troy says, congrats on the 200th. Here's to 200 more. How can we mature as humans to overcome our predilection to fear and rage? I don't understand why education is not more broadly championed as a silver bullet to the ills of human civilization.
Wow.
Great question.
Well, it is a great question. We can't overcome the impulse we have to be susceptible to rage and fear, right? Because that's programmed into us. But what we can be is aware of our likelihood to surrender to those things, and that awareness. It's part of why on History Matters we've talked so many times about pausing before responding, just giving yourself that moment to breathe and pause. That moment in which you say to yourself, well, before I get angry or upset or rage or whatever, is there someone who really wants me to be angry right now? Like, how am I responding and why am I responding? I don't think we can move past our tendency to rage or be fearful, but we can be a lot smarter about recognizing ways in which people are trying to push us into those zones. And that's a powerful form of politics. And that's not new, right? I mean, that's what propaganda is. Some propaganda, right, is aimed at making you fearful or angry, and then you act out of fear or rage. Powerful political tool, not new to the current moment. But what we do have in the current moment is what appears now to be a political party that is having a hard time deciding what it stands for policy wise, apart from getting people really angry at the other. And you can define the other however you want to. We are at a moment when there are big chunk of people on the right who are not necessarily defending democracy, not necessarily a promoting per se a policy. They are promoting big, powerful emotion that has a real power to it. We see that all the time. We see it around us in lots of different ways. So we're in a moment when there's a power play in a deliberate, somewhat policy-less way of trying to get people to respond. And that's not, democracy doesn't shrivel with emotion. It's not as though doing this in and of itself is an attack on democracy, but that kind of behavior, that kind of rage cultivation, rage harvesting, when it's being promoted by people who are undermining democratic rules, conventions, and norms, that's a problem. That's a big problem. So, a lot of what we've been doing in meeting here every week for 200 weeks is promoting awareness of what's going on around us. And that simple awareness and the fact that we could pause and take a breath and think about what's happening before responding, that matters. Is Kay doing a 1776?
There have been a lot of 1776. I've been seeing it fly by in the chat.
Does anybody care? Does anybody see what I see? Oh, I can sing that whole song, folks.
Yep.
After party.
Yeah. History Matters karaoke. Okay, so we have two questions that are asking about the role of the media. One from our friend Dave and one from our friend Debbie Pomerantz, and they both are longtime community members. So I'm going to try and combine these. Dave was saying, is our collective trust in things like public health, science, and the facts been diminished over the past 200 weeks? What role did the media play in this process? He refers to the election being stolen, or January 6th wasn't an insurrection, was his examples. He wondering what must and should the media do to help heal the Democratic Republic? And Debbie's just asking in general if the media is partially responsible for this rage farming. And she's thinking about things like TikTok and that sort of thing.
Well, so the media can mean different things, right? So the media can mean the press, or the media can mean just different forms of media that reach people, like social media. I'll start out by saying those are not necessarily the same thing. As far as the press goes, and I'm not the first person to say this, it's said all the time, it appears to many people, including me, that there are some ways in which the press's commitment to being balanced has ill-equipped them to deal with a moment when politics is imbalanced. And by that, I mean, if there are people who are aggressively attacking democracy, both sidesing everything and saying everything is equal is a problem. Now, that's a challenge. What do you do? How do you behave as the press at a moment when you can't simply equate always two sides and both sides everything? And we can all, I'm sure, people can think, they're now thinking of things they've seen in the press where you're like, really, that's a both sides moment? Good people on all sides. It's a challenge. But I don't think it's a challenge that has been necessarily met yet. And I think, even as of this moment, the fact that some people, some press outlets are talking about, Trump or Biden, which one is better? And not saying, wow, one candidate says he wants to be a dictator. We actually have to acknowledge that. And this isn't just a normal election. The press, some aspects of the press are having a hard time dealing with the fact that you can't both sides some issues. So that's part of the problem. The other idea of media, like TikTok and that's, I promise I won't go at length here, but some of you who know me well know, like, this is technology and democracy. And I get very excited when I talk about technology and democracy. But it is a fact that new forms of technology, and I know TikTok isn't new, but still relatively new forms of technology that affect how people communicate with each other always affect democracy, always. Because if you're talking about how people communicate with each other, if you're talking about how politicians and leaders communicate with the public, then you're talking about democracy. And so it's why in the past, the Telegraph scrambled democracy in crazy ways. If you think about it, and the impact of television in the 1960s and the civil rights era and what happened when people could see what was happening, technology always shapes things. And so social media generally does that. I see people beaming in, man. And TikTok too. But we are still, in a way, in the midst of that. We're watching it happen. Even having a tweeting president was like, ooh, what's that going to do? Remember, and all the talk of like, can you silence a tweeting president? What does that mean? How do you deal with it? We're kind of in the middle of that question and what it does. And unfortunately, that's not causing, but certainly fueling some of the confusion of democracy in the current moment that we're in.
If there is, okay, Joanne, we're going to pause and take a family photo because Grace has to leave. So John, come back, and Claire, get on there.
What about Matt?
Where's Matt?
Oh, geez.
Oh, please don't.
Oh, geez.
Matt, are you still there?
Matt.
Farmer meeting. So I'm sorry I can't stay for the after party, but I just wanted to.
Oh no, we need a family.
Partnering with you and this.
Are you coming tomorrow night, Grace?
Oh, there he is.
Okay, we got him. We got him. Matt, quick.
Okay.
So I did want to thank you all.
Yay!
All right, everybody smile. I'm going to try and do this. And somebody else, hang on a minute. I got to get the framing in here and all the hearts. All right, smile, kids. All right, I think I got it. All right. Thank you, Grace.
Okay, Grace.
On my screen, all the hearts are like.
Thing.
Thank you for Grace.
Yeah, I'll post that on our Slack channel and through Twitter, and if I can think of any other platform.
I still have the email I sent to you. I sent it to Jessica saying, what do you think of this idea?
Thanks to everybody. So good to see everybody in the chat and everybody on here. Good to see you all. Bye, everybody.
Grace.
Okay.
So I still have the email where Grace sent me that said, can you fill in for me for 1 week? And then it was like, can you do 1 more week? And then after like 3 months, I was like, should I just block out Friday mornings on my calendar? Because every week Carolee would say, are you doing that again? I'm like, I don't know. I'm going to show up if they need me.
Yeah, formation. We've always been a program in formation. So
all right, we have a few more questions if we want to. I don't want to ignore the questions. Matt, are you still going to be here for the after party?
I will. So you can, I will hide away until then.
You
Okay.
don't have to hide, but I just want to make sure we get as many questions in as we can. Okay, Amy Edge. I think, Amy, isn't this your first week? I think you're the new Amy, if I'm not mistaken. Amy Edge asked, do you think the increased use of the passive voice in professional communication is a symptom or a cause of the lack of accountability? She said she's noticed this shift to the passive voice over her 30-year career. And I'm not sure what her career is in. So Amy, maybe you could tell us in the chat what sort of career you're involved. Are you a teacher or, that aspect? But wondering about that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I can't say personally that I've noticed that there's an increase. If there has been an increase in passive voice, that certainly does suggest, because that's those of us here who teach. Oh, she's a lawyer. Okay, that would make sense too that you would notice that. Those of us who teach know how much we hate passive voice because if a student says, it happened that or something, there's no blame of any kind. Like, no, it magically happened. There's no one caused it to happen. And that's a problem. But if that has indeed been a trend, and I don't know, but if it is, that's precisely at least a passive voice helps avoid taking blame. Then that's fascinating. And that goes along with what I was saying earlier about the press, and more widely, right? People don't want to cast blame. They don't want to take sides. And there are some times in which blame needs to be given if it's, merited and just, and there's evidence for it. And sometimes sides need to be taken, like anti-Nazi sides, right? That's a good thing, right? Nazis, we don't like Nazis, so you could take a side against a Nazi. That's okay. But our ongoing sort of thoughts about the press and democracy and both sides and fairness and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, those things aren't bad, but they're darn complicated in the moment that we're in, and not sorting that through is dangerous. And a lot of people talk about that all the time in the press. So it's nothing new that I'm saying here, but it's something that it took people, I think, a long time to actually start to talk about and think about. And I don't think there's necessarily an easy solution yet.
Amy said she's had to correct a lot of her interns, I guess, at the law offices, which is interesting. And then a lot of other people are chiming in from different career zones, and they're kind of saying they're seeing the same thing.
Interesting. Yeah, that's not something that I knew.
No, I wasn't thinking about it either, but now I'm going to be looking for it.
I know.
Cece also had a social media kind of a little bit of a different slant on that earlier question as a follow-up. She says she stopped watching media TV news because she didn't feel like it was, right. And it seemed to be both sidesing everything. So she wonders, do you see that changing at all? She would hate to think that it would take an extreme act of violence for them, to have a wake-up call, as if we haven't had enough of that already. But she says not all might be both sidesing it, but it seems like when they do, they get a lot of free publicity, and then they just skip the bad stuff. So she's wondering.
Well, and publicity maybe is the key of that too, right? So on the one hand, if you both sides everything, people like to see that, right? So, okay, yay, it's equal. The other thing, as far as publicity goes, the other half of that equation is people who routinely say, even from Washington, D.C., from Congress, routinely obnoxious things because they know they'll get attention for it. And that's why they say them. Deliberately upsetting, often just, wrong. And they're just trying, rage harvesting, getting attention, having people notice them. That's not new to politics by any means. But in this particular moment, if you're doing that in ways that are deliberately stabbing at just the basic working of democracy, if you're trying to get people riled up about something that, say, didn't happen, or something that happened for different reasons than you're saying, well, then you may be getting attention, and that may be what you want, but in a sense, you're also spewing propaganda just to get people going and not really helping the democratic process. And there's a lot of that going on now, and that gets back to technology, right? Some, person and notoriously loud-voiced person in Congress says something deliberately obnoxious and wrong, and then everybody either cites that person because they like what she said or because they hate what she said, but she gets a lot of attention, and then that works to her benefit. That's a problem. Not a new problem. I write about it in my book. people in Congress, doing things in part because they would get attention for those things. Again, that's a democracy thing, that the public matters, and when you're a politician, you need to appeal to the public, and the press and technology is part of how you do that, and that's a fact. But the working of it, this it's something again that we've talked about a lot of times, which is that the founding generation were uncomfortable, many of them, with democracy because of all of its vulnerabilities, right? Public opinion matters, which means the public can be misled and then do crazy things. Uh, Demagogues, they can do the misleading and they can lie and do things to get power, and then they can do whatever they want once they get power. There are lots of ways in which democracy is a fragile form of governance. It is. I've said before, right? Its fragility in some ways is its glory, because it is about us. It is about we the people. It has the room for the people to have an influence, for the people to have power in a way that isn't true in more repressive forms of government. But that fact, that space, that freedom can be dangerous when used by, let's call them, bad agents, right? Um, that's democracy, and that's why it discomfited some at the outset. And that gets back to some of what we do here when we meet here every week, right? That needs awareness. That needs people coming together to point to what they see and to object to what seems wrong. That requires an active citizenry, an active, informed citizenry, and that's some of what we've been doing here on History Matters.
Yeah. We have so many more questions.
I know there's so much.
There's so much. But this one comes from Kathleen V., another longtime community member. She says, some are now saying that it's a lie that the separation of church and state is in our Constitution. They're saying the founding fathers, or I prefer founders, were followers of the Christian faith. Can you clarify the history of church and state? That could be a whole episode right there. But
that could be a whole episode.
I'm hearing more and more of that lately as well as an educator.
That actually should be an episode. So I won't go into, and I'm going to store that away. I won't go into detail.
February.
Right. But the fact of the matter is that, yes, there was an assumption that church and state were supposed to be separate. They talk about it. Thomas Jefferson talks about it a lot. There was not an assumption that there should be any kind of politically mandated religion of any kind. I won't go into detail here because it literally is the moment when we're supposed to stop, and I don't want to do it a disservice, this topic. But the people who are now saying, oh no, from the very beginning, church and state have been together and that's what the founders wanted. No, not in the way that people are saying they want it now. So that's an example of convenient, I tell my students, if you can find a founder to kind of say half of what you want to say, you kind of win, right? So people cherry pick founder words, or make them up. And then they can say, no, here's what the founders thought. We've talked before about, yes, I see the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, on Thomas Jefferson's memorial. I just lost track of where I was going because I got Thomas Jefferson and the Virginia Statute for Religion.
I got her all excited. You mentioned TJ.
That's it. I got all excited and I lost where I was going. But at any rate, the larger point here is that I know I tell my students that cherry picking founder quotes, they're gonna, once they take my classes, they're going to be able to notice it all the time when politicians do it, because they do it all the time. And the problem is people don't know it. Right. They just assume, oh, Thomas Jefferson said that. And then it's, it's the history police, people like me that are like, oh, no, I'm sorry. Thomas Jefferson never said that. Again, it's why it's important to teach about history. I don't want to keep talking because I know we're coming near the end of our moment here, and we need to do the after party. Let me explain actually what's going to happen next for those of you, because I know there are some of you who are here for the first time. So what typically happens, we do what we just did. I talk for 30 minutes. People ask questions for 30 minutes. And then we have the after party. And during the after party, what we do is we stop recording so that we could be even freer and easier than we were before. Although I sang during this episode, though, so, I don't know how much freer I can get, but probably some, and that's scary. But at any rate, what we do at the end of every episode is we go to the after party, we stop recording. If you are on Facebook, to join the after party, you will need to leave Facebook and go to ncheteach.org/conversations. That's ncheteach.org/conversations. And then you too can poof, be in the after party with the rest of us. I almost forgot to say poof, and that is a bingo word for sure. Poof. It's on the mug. Because I say it all the time, as well as partner in crime and any other number of things. At any rate, we are about to head into the after party. As I said, if you're on Facebook, you need to leave. We will stop recording. Before we do that, just a few more words. First of all, I want to thank my current partner in crime, Annie, and Claire and Jessica for being here and making this possible in the way that they have, and for all of the work that they do. I want to thank John, who has done this for so long, and may not always be here every week, although I suspect he is, but I'm not gonna pin that on him. And then I want to thank Grace and I want to thank Matt for everything that they did to make this happen and get this going. And most important of all, I just want to thank all of you. I know every week, and I've already said it once, just thank you for coming here every Friday and doing the work of democracy together, having the conversation of democracy. It matters. And it matters, obviously, to us, but it matters, generally speaking, even if you think to yourself, but it's a small group of people talking. Yes, but you take your thoughts and your awareness and your commitment to what's going on and out into the world, and you share that with others, and then it has an influence. So I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for building this community. I want to thank you for meaning more to me than I ever imagined any of this would. I just thought, I'm going to do a good thing. And now, lo and behold, many of you have said this, and I'll say it too. You know, it got me and so many of you through the pandemic, being here, having this community, and doing something that felt worthwhile, important, productive. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for creating this amazing thing, which will keep going. And we are going to sally forth into the world and work for democracy from now on, right? Moving ahead after episode 200, we keep doing the work. So anyway, I wanted to say thank you before we head into the after party. Woo-hoo. And I guess that's all I want to say. It's 11:05, so we need to head off into the after party. Those of you who are here for the first time, stick around for the after party. I don't know what'll happen in the after party, but you should stick around. So, okay. I guess I will stop there.